would both have a really deep appreciation of the fact that as human beings we are endlessly fascinated by stories of triumph over adversity, whether it's beating illness, sacrificing one's own life to save another, battling the elements. And the language that exists, the English language around this concept is interesting, and there are lots of words that we seem to use interchangeably, whether it's bravery or strength and indeed courage. But I just wonder whether, in your minds, harking back to our theme of courage today, whether there are subtle differences that are important if we really want to act with courage. Do you want to start, Margie?
Yeah, I think, and I said this, often we think of heroism and heroic acts, people on the battlefield diving into a frozen river to save a child, that sort of thing. And I think absolutely that is courageous, there's no doubt, but I think there's distinctions in what it can mean as well, and that's where, on that everyday sense, a willingness to be vulnerable to things we're afraid of, and choosing to put ourselves in a place of risk and vulnerability versus just being forced into it. And I think there's different shades and different meanings for what courage can be throughout our lives. And Rob's brother, obviously in a situation, responded with extraordinary courage to a situation most of us could never imagine finding ourselves in. But by the same token, on a daily basis, I think we all have opportunities to be courageous. You don't have to be in some extraordinary situation to act with courage.
Was there a first time for you, Rob, when you sort of took a breath and a step back and said to yourself, bloody hell, that was courageous?
I think, yeah, in some ways. I think you discover that when you actually don't take the step you should take.
So it's the comment that was cowardly of me.
Yeah, and it's a realisation that, and it was actually in doing the film project, at one stage I decided, I pulled out, actually, I can't do this, I can't do it. And I realised...
What was it, where was the cowardliness? Was it emotional?
I don't know, I just threw my hands in the air. I found it was almost too challenging for a variety of reasons. And this trying to put together a film and raise money, there's all these logistical things that go with that, that are quite challenging in their own right. And then you've got this emotional thing hanging over it. I just threw my hands up at one point. For about 6 months I stopped the project, and then I realised, this is not helping anything or anyone tell this story. If I'm going to be a weak little, caught up in my own little grief trip, that's not going to help anything. And I realised that it had to happen. It had to happen regardless of how I felt. For my family, for the people of Cambodia, and for the education system, that we've actually developed a whole curriculum around it. If you have a chance, brother1.co.nz, it's awesome. It's so cool. And, we've got kids in New Zealand now learning off that school.
Yeah. But just to sort of move briefly, a sort of step away from the personal dimension, with Margaret Thatcher's death and funeral this week, there's been a lot of talk about the conviction politician. We've also seen, President Barack Obama's sort of outrage at the US Senate's failure to pass gun control legislation, and without sort of wanting to drift into any sort of partisan political conversation. Do you think that there is a lack of courage in politics these days, and do we need it? Now, don't be careful.
I absolutely believe I think there are plenty of, it's not too hard to find a lack of courage in politics, I think.
Maybe the question should be, is there a role for courage? Is there a need for courage?
I absolutely believe there's a need for courage. I think for anyone in a leadership role, and obviously the people we've elected into our government are in leadership roles, to me courage lies at the heart of what they it's the virtue that they need to embody in order to truly be an effective leader. And I think leaders who are always just trying to appeal to the general populace and popular politics aren't able to create the changes that we often need for our societies.
So if you were presenting to the Liberal Party or to Labor, what would you be saying? about courage?
I would be saying that sometimes you have to risk being unpopular, and I know for them it's always that fine line, yeah, but we want to stay in power. But how much do you sell your soul in order to stay in power? And I think we see a lot of that where people, they seem to lose their way, the compass of what they're really about gets put to the side in order to stay in power. And my advice would be, you have to be true to yourself. And I think we really admire politicians over the course of history, whether in Australia or in the US. There's plenty of examples who they may not always be popular, but we know that they've done what they really believe is ultimately right for the people.
I mean, Kiwis have always been incredibly courageous as a nation, haven't they? When they sort of stuck it to the Americans over the nuclear issue.
First to give women the vote.
And this week, legalised gay marriage. What is it in the psyche of that nation that sees it sort of punching above its weight so often?
Well, I don't think it punches enough above its weight. So I mean, I see lots of things that could be there could be a lot more courage still. I mean, I won't list them, but I don't know. I think Australia is very similar. I don't see there's any one. Countries around the world in isolated pockets do amazing things. Isn't there? No great change has ever been done politically, though. Really, it's the lobby. It's the person who's prepared to put their neck on the line. The Martin Luther Kings who make the big change political through putting their own life on the line, effectively. I mean, that's real courage, putting yourself out there, man. And, there's lots of things that all of us could do if you feel passionately about it, if you believe enough, like the Thatcher example, that it's the right thing, be it right or wrong, depending on your perspective, that you're going to give it a go. And
well, just back on Thatcher very briefly, I mean, she was incredibly divisive. So, is it possible to be courageous and do the right thing and also be inclusive?
I think so. A very good friend of mine, he's a great leader. He gets things done without upsetting people. I don't know how. And yet he does things that I know people are very offended by and don't want to do. But he does it in a beautiful, honest way because he is a genuine, empathetic leader in his team. And it's fantastic to observe that. And I don't how do you do that? It's just through empathy and understanding people's positions.
I think once I heard said, it's a greater honour to be respected than it is to be liked. And I think when it comes to leaders doing things that others don't always like, people might not always like what you have to say and like your policies and like your changes, but if they respect you as a person of integrity and character, for instance, I'm sure your friend is, then people will respect your right to sometimes do things that they might disagree with. And Margaret Thatcher once said, you can't lead from the crowd. And I think too often people try and lead by staying with where everybody else in the consensus. And sometimes they have to be willing, though, to do things that people don't like. And I think that takes courage.
You both touched briefly on your childhoods, and Rob, clearly, your mum in that anecdote that you just told, clearly sort of put the wind beneath your wings and gave you her blessing and her permission to be courageous. You were telling me earlier that I guess your mother had quite a different reaction to your courageous aspirations, and yet here you both sit today talking to us about courage in an incredibly authentic way.
I think as parents, I look at my parents, we want to protect our kids from pain and harm. So I know when I shared with you earlier that I told her at one stage I wanted to be Jan Event. And she was like, you can't be Jan Event, you don't know enough about what's going on in the world. And I look back on that as not my mum trying to dampen aspirations as much as I think probably trying to protect me from being disappointed, trying to do something that I couldn't do. And I think our parents, I'm a different parent than my parents were, but I see the world differently and have experienced a lot more of it too. So I have a son who wants to be a pro basketball player and he's not that tall. And I've said, you just keep practicing, Lachlan, whether it happens, and a daughter who wants to be a Hollywood actress. And she just made the Target commercial for Mother's Day. So you never know, there's a first step. But I think we've got to encourage them to go for their dreams and role model that too.
Is that the approach that you take with your kids?
I try and steer them away from sport a little bit if I can. I don't want them being, too focused on. My eldest boy he's a sport junkie. But I have to say, just to comment on sport, it literally saved me, I have to say. As a teenager going through our family losses, if I was into the booze, the alcohol was a big thing, a big part of my life. And my mates, fortunately one of my mates is into sport as well, and that saved me, gave me a focus. So I don't steer them away too much, but I want to see the kids have a balance of all the creatives and the arts, the music, the drama, and whatever it is, painting, just have a go at everything. And actually, I think one of our things with our children, in general terms, we tend to, as kids, go around in cliques, don't we? The kids, there's 4 or 5 of them at school, all stick together and they sort of follow each other around, and they don't want to branch out because they're scared they'll fall over and be humiliated. They spend their lives at school avoiding humiliation. And if we can give them that, just have a go, Try as many different things as you can during your school years and find out what you're good at doing.
Yeah.
Find out what you enjoy doing and then get into it, And it's all through those formative years, right through to your really late 40s, actually trying to work out what it is you want to do.
I think resilience goes hand in hand with that too. And we didn't really focus on that a lot today, but for ourselves, being resilient to adversity, to setbacks as kids, go for it. You might not achieve what you want. You might not come first in every race and get it. But realising it's good to give it a go and teaching kids to be resilient, but for ourselves, knowing that we can continue to build our resilience. Because if we're really resilient, then we can go after anything because we can bounce back when things don't go so well.
And that leads me to my final question, which is there anything that, for either of you, that still makes your courage waver?
When my wife tells me I'm wrong, and I don't know if she's right or not. It's that kind of thing, Is that thing where there's a saying, I think, that saying, sort of a philosophical saying, if a tree falls in the forest and no one heard it, did it happen? Well, relating to that, if a man makes a statement and a woman doesn't hear it, is he still wrong?
Yes. Yeah. And every husband should know that.
That's great, isn't it? I love that. Yeah. So that makes me tremble in my boots. Yeah.
Anything that still makes you wobbly?
I think I spend so much time outside my comfort zone. It's not that. So for me, lots of things still make me nervous, but I just have got better at. I call it my small poppy committee. Wants me to play safe, think small, and don't do anything that could make me vulnerable. And I just have got better at telling it to shut up, get it back into place, and just step outside my comfort zone anyway. So,
ladies and gentlemen, would you please join me in thanking Margie Warrell and Robert Hamill. Thank you both.